Good evening, everyone. My name is Jane, and I've been asked to tell my story, which is the story of my faith. So as you might be able to tell from the accent, I grew up in Wales, in the Swansea Valley, in a very beautiful area in the countryside, in a little village. And I grew up with a dog. I was an only child, and I spent a lot of time in the countryside and developed a really deep love of nature. So it was all around me. It was so incredibly beautiful. And I always believed in God, I think, from being quite a young child. I couldn't really understand how else there could be this beautiful, complex, meaningful world if there were not a creator that had created it. And I also loved science from an early age, and I always wanted to understand how this world came about from a scientific perspective. You know, how did the stars appear? How did life come to develop into all the different species and all the ways of making a living? So I always read a lot of science books to keep me occupied as well. My parents weren't really churchgoers, but my father did take me to Sunday school until I was 7, and then we moved, and I stopped going to church until I was about 14, when someone from my school invited me one day to a youth group that was happening at the local church. And it was there that I learned a lot more about God, about him sending his son, about God, the creator of the whole universe, becoming a baby, becoming a helpless baby at Christmas. I mean, that still blows my mind. The God that created the galaxies, he became a helpless baby, and the reason he did it was to save us. I learned at that youth group that the world is broken. We're all broken, because we've all turned away from God, all of us. Even Frank, even me, everybody, the Queen, the Archbishop of Canterbury, we've all turned away from God, and we all need God, and we all need Jesus to save us from our sin. And so he was born for that reason, to die. And so I became a Christian. I gave my life to Jesus when I was about 14 or 15. I was baptized, full immersion in a deep font that we had in the church. And I was really happy in church for quite a few years. But I kept reading about science, and I decided I wanted to study it at university. And I was reading a lot of books about evolution, and particularly the books of Richard Dawkins, who you don't hear about that much these days. But I was so struck by his incredibly beautiful writing and how he explained in a way that I never really understood before the power of evolution by natural selection, how that explained and in such an incredible way, and how much evidence there is for that having taken place, that things didn't just appear all of a sudden as they are now, but they took billions of years to evolve through this incredibly simple in some ways, but powerful process of things which are better adapted, surviving and passing on more offspring. So then I came across a problem, really, in that I felt like that I suppose explained so much. It explained life and nature and everything that I loved. And so I felt, well, why did I need God? Maybe I didn't need God after all as an explanation. And I felt that I had to choose between science and faith. And that was really hard, and I really struggled with it. And it felt that if I had to deny science, that would be like denying that 2 and 2 are 4. And I couldn't do that. And so I decided I couldn't believe in God at around the age of 17. And I went to university. I went to Oxford. Richard Dawkins taught me, so that wasn't really helpful either. So I kept hearing from him. And so for many years, I didn't go to church. And I suppose I felt like I wasn't a Christian. And yet, it never completely went away. If something really difficult happened in life, if I felt frightened or something sad happened, I would pray just instinctively. I would sometimes go to church, just sit in a church, and that still brought me some comfort. But I was still quite far from God, really, and felt like I wasn't a Christian anymore. And then, I suppose it was when a friend of mine, a really good friend from university, she got married in December one year, and then on her honeymoon she was killed. She was in a car with her new husband in India, and a lorry smashed into them, and they were both killed instantly. And so I found myself a month after being at her wedding, I was at her funeral. She was only 30 years old. Her name was Michaela. And I couldn't believe that she didn't exist anymore. That just didn't make sense, that she was such a wonderful, kind, alive, brilliant person, that she couldn't exist anymore. And so I thought, well, she must still exist. And I knew that she believed in God. And so I found myself in church again. And I think that's, again, when I realized that God had always really held on to me in those years, that he still held on to me. And so I started going to church again. And over the years, I've realized that science and faith are not incompatible. I became a scientist, so that's my job these days. So I'm immersed in science, and yet I'm also a Christian, and I still believe that God created everything, and that he used the process of evolution to create all the species that we see on the earth that we've done so much damage to. But he foresaw, and he knew that when those first replicated molecules, when those first single cells and the sponges and the dinosaurs and us, he knew what was going to happen, but he used that process of evolution to get there. And to me, that is even more mind-blowing, that science actually, it's not saying there's no God, it's telling you how God does some of the amazing things that he has done. So yeah, that's my story. Thank you.